everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's event. My name is Kelly Barner. I'm the head of content and operations here at Art of Procurement. And I'm glad that you've joined me because we have a terrific topic and a terrific speaker who's got some great stories to share. Now, our topic for today is the state of packaging procurement in 2024. And depending on the company or the industry that you work in, packaging might be thought of as indirect spend. It might be seen or managed as direct spend, but we're almost definitely not thinking of it and not speaking about it quite enough. So we're going to learn a whole lot more today about what your opportunities are for the year. Now, a couple of quick housekeeping things before I bring in today's guest. There are a few different ways that you're going to get to participate in today's conversation. The big obvious way is up the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see that there's a chat bar with some welcome messages in it. Feel free to share where you're from, what you want to hear, your responses to what you hear today, and any questions that you'd like me to put to our speaker. The other thing that you'll notice is that down below this video, there's a little emoji button, all happy emojis. But if you want to give us a little bit of applause, give us some love, share a thumbs up during the session, I welcome you to engage that way as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to bring in my guest. He's Matt Reddington, Vice President of Packaging and Logistics from Procure Analytics.
Kelly.
Hi, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I am doing great. As I said to you when we were sitting backstage, it is a great day to talk about packaging. Now, people will know the tradition on the Art of Procurement podcast of asking people, did you find procurement or did procurement find you? I'm going to do a little alliteration swap out and ask, did you find packaging or did packaging find you?
That's really an interesting one to start out with. So I'd have to say it's a combination. So I grew up in a household where my father was actually in procurement. Started with Richardson Vicks, where he was actually a packaging buyer of all things. And so all through my childhood, he was in different roles through procurement. Richardson Vicks became part of Procter & Gamble. So grew up in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. And he had lots of different roles there. One of the best roles he had that really drove me towards procurement as my undergrad degree was he was negotiating, and what I had believed at the time was he was negotiating contracts for the L'Oreal models, which I thought he was sitting in the room negotiating contracts with models, not a whole series of lawyers. Later, I found out that in school as things went on, but he let me believe that for a little bit of time. So
that certainly would help with our recruiting efforts, wouldn't it?
It really would, yeah. If you're sitting there negotiating with models, I'm not sure that would be a great contract you put together, but maybe. So that was kind of the start of it. But really, in college, I got into procurement as a major, and I actually have a major in procurement, which doesn't exist anymore at Miami University. It became a supply chain thing as the organizations try to adopt it and move forward. But my first job out of school was with a 3PL company in Florida. And that was really my first, let's say, big person job as it related to packaging and understanding of packaging. And one of my first real interactions with packaging in that role was opening up rail cars and helping to take storage from a beer manufacturer. This one happened to be Corona, and storing that into the facility. And they called it breaking the rail car. And at the time, I had really no clue what that really meant. I thought it was like breaking a door open or things along those lines. But they actually take a square clamp and they ram it into 3 pallets of Corona beer. So you're trying to get the 1 pallet in the doorway out, but you're breaking the 2 pallets that are next to it. And you're just breaking cases and cases of Corona beer bottles to pull these pallets out. And it was a really fun experience to understand that was a cheaper option for Corona than putting in a lot of protective.
That is interesting.
But the other thing of it was we had these folks that were there full-time employees of the 3PL or the warehouse that they got to take home the beer that they didn't break in the cases that they were a little nervous about us college kids coming in and playing around with all that stuff. But that was really my foray into packaging, was right there, trying to understand how that would even make logical sense as a consumer at the time. It's like, wait, yeah. I have very little money and you would want me to break something that I really treasure to buy and have after work each day. So a combination of both is how we got there. And then, 20 years later, we're still loving packaging, talking about it every day.
Well, and one of the things that's so interesting I find about packaging as a category is that it means a very wide range of things. And some of that we'll get into and talk about today. Excuse me. But given that you have a background in this, sorry, I'm wondering if you have any strange or wild packaging stories beyond the Corona rail card that you wanted to share with us.
Strange and wild. I don't know. One of my favorite ones, though, is back at the company I was with before Procure Analytics. We were working on a project for Dyson, the vacuum clean manufacturer, the hair dryers. Folks will know them for a bunch of different things. And it was really around a sustainability push and them wanting to go to zero plastic within their packaging. And so we had the task of twofold. One, creating a unboxing experience that allowed the consumer to actually be able to take the vacuum out of the package and understand how things went together because of the way it had been placed or juried inside the box to shrink the overall package down. The first things you took out of the box were not necessarily the first things you needed with assembly. And I'm sure we've all seen that with kids' toys is you get this thing out and you don't know where it goes and then you end up losing it as you're assembling. So it was partially that, but also partially removing all the plastic bags. So if you bought a Dyson vacuum cleaner 7-8 years ago, you probably had 12, 14 different little poly bags in there protecting different parts. It was so the surfaces didn't interact with each other. You didn't get scratches on your brand new $600 vacuum cleaner and returning it. So we had a lot of studies and work going around how you had these different Class A surfaces or finishes on the product and how they would interact with a fiber-based packaging, either wrapped in paper or the scuffing of a corrugate box or a corrugated insert, and how you could move through all those things. But also when you put something in a box, you have more of a rigid structure. It doesn't tend to form to just the parts a little bit bigger. So it was really fun because it was kind of our design team working on the design for the designer, right? Dyson is this great designer out there. So it was really a unique experience to help somebody who is this great designer and form and function repackage a solution that was one, sustainable, but two, really made it a much better experience for the consumer.
Well, I think Dyson is a great example. I will say I love my Dyson. It's actually a little bit embarrassing. I think I'm on my third stick vacuum because I burn them out. And nothing against the product. I am really using it that often. Little OCD with the Dyson. But they're known as such an innovative company. You think there's that fan that doesn't have the little propeller blades, or their hair dryer is very different. Certainly, they've revolutionized home vacuuming with the stick vacuum. I'd be curious to hear from the packaging side of things. Like, we might not be surprised that a company like Dyson would be leading the way in terms of innovative packaging. But if we were to start with the packaging and not necessarily to know a lot about a company, what might you be able to tell about the way that company operates, what some of their objectives are, just by looking at the packaging decisions that they're making?
That's really a great question. And what I tell a lot of folks, and definitely folks I talk to in procurement or about packaging today, is your packaging is really the physical manifestation of what your brand represents. And so that interaction with the consumer, whether it be through e-commerce and delivering to your home or on store shelves, that means a lot to folks. Mm-hmm. And ensuring that decision point, either when somebody's unboxing at home, which is another decision point, or on shelf is there, is really great. But really, I would look at things differently. So a lot of what we think of when we think of procurement and packaging specifically is cost takeout or PPV variances. Okay. How are we going to take another 3% out of the cost this year? Very rarely do I find folks that have gone upstream to the conversation with marketing or the design organization or the engineers that are coming out with a new product and work on how you design cost out of the packaging at the front end. Really about 2/3 of that packaging cost are built in before procurement ever gets their hands on it. So when I'm looking at stuff from a packaging perspective, either in-store or at e-commerce coming to my home, I'm looking at things a little differently, right? In store, I'm looking at these billboards. They're supposed to attract me. They want to draw me in. They want me to interact with the package. One of the sustainable challenges we've got with packaging and store retail is a lot of big brands, not naming any, but if you go down the laundry detergent aisle, you'll see a lot of them have a massive amount of storefront that they're representing there.
Yeah.
A lot of that product is water. They are keeping that space. They're paying for that space in your large, big box retailers as a billboard to attract people, to get people to buy that brand versus buying another brand. it's a sustainability problem, but it still draws you in, right? You've got different call outs that people are making. If I think about chips as you walk down the aisle, the last time I bought a different bag of chips has probably been years, but if my bag's out, then I'm looking all of a sudden in that same area and I'm looking for different call outs that people have. It was cooked this way, or this one's this much less fat, or this one has this much new flavor to it. So it's a different interaction in the store. And really, when we start looking at someone's packaging, that outer shipper or the box that you receive at your house or e-commerce, that's the first interaction somebody's got, right? So if we all think about the Amazon box we get, they've branded the box, they've branded the tape.
Right.
They're great at co-branding, right? So a lot of Marvel movies were advertised on there. They're getting Marvel to pay for their packaging for us, folks. It's a great idea. But really, it's that first interaction we have inside of there. And we've all come to expect, maybe right or wrong from Amazon, an overboxed experience with lots of extra space in there. But once we get down to that actual product we purchased, looking at that and understanding it, it gives us value. Did what I pay for it really be warranted for the cost of what we're looking at? Is that packaging showing me or telling me that this item is of value, or was it just cheaply thrown together? And there's lots of different solutions as we take a look at packaging on how you can deliver a unique experience to the consumer, drive sustainability, and also take cost out of the business. But it's not always going to be about price. I think there's a bit between price and cost.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. A couple of thoughts based on what you shared. One is that, when you talk about that experience, I think the Amazon corrugated boxes are a great example, and they clearly recognize the importance of that, because if anybody's ever ordered an Amazon gift card, you can send it in the little tiny cardboard sort of replica looking. They clearly understand there's nothing that's a mistake or an accident or a coincidence about the consistency of their branding and the regularity of that, even though they have innovated and moved into different types of envelopes and mailers and things that just come in the box that they're in. But the other thing is the marketing value of packaging. And I have to think that this is one of those areas of the business where procurement gets an opportunity to sort of put their arms around the big picture of what's going on. With so much digital media and less traditional marketing channels being successful at reaching consumers, that moment of purchase, what you have chosen to put on your bag of chips, it's kettle cooked, or it's 30% less sodium, or whatever information and how you've chosen to feature that on your packaging, that truly is a revenue driver, isn't it?
Very, very much so. And in fact, another little side story here around a particular brand, one that I like quite a bit, Patagonia. And now I'm a big proponent of shopping local. And if you've listened to some other packaging podcasts, I've talked about that. But Patagonia had their annual end of year sale, and I was looking for a new jacket, even though my daughter tells me I don't need any more jackets, and I'm a bit of a jacket snob or aficionado. I really just think I'm buying them for specific purposes. So couldn't find what I wanted locally, so ordered on Patagonia sale. Got a very, very good deal on it. Love their stance on sustainability, using plastic bottles back in the jackets, really minimizing on packaging. A lot of their tags are fiber-based, easy to recycle for me at home. But my experience actually receiving that package made me question whether the jacket was really of value to me, even though I knew the product beforehand. So I had not seen this packaging from Patagonia before, but they've moved to a fully fiber bag. It's not a padded fiber mailer, it's a full fiber bag. And ultimately, the choice of how it was shipped to me really, I think, drove my perception of it, but it came to me via USPS. And I guess we've got a lazy mailman. And that mailman decided that he was shoving this jacket, which is kind of puffy, into my mailbox at my home, which is, a normal size mailbox. In doing so, the bag had about 4 or 5 different rips in it. I could clearly see the product through the bag. And it made me question, one, why did Patagonia use this type of packaging if that's the experience somebody's going to have with it? And two, why choose USPS? There's so many different opportunities out there. I've ordered from them before, and it showed them on my front door from a UPS or a FedEx or a LaserShip or a lot of other last mile delivery places. So it's made me question things. Ultimately, the jacket's going back. I ended up not really liking what it was doing, but that packaging gave me a different perception before I even opened the package today. I love the use of the fiber bag. I think it's great because I can throw it in curbside recycling. I'm not having to worry about that. But that packaging experience for me made me have a kind of a negative feeling towards the brand, for one that I really thought was doing a lot of the right things and really supporting, similar to REI, which I tend to shop frequently, and my daughter would tell me, promoting the outdoors and sustainable solutions out there. So it's interesting how a brand I value, a brand that I think is doing the right things, or at least trying to do the right things, then comes back around and I have this negative experience. And so it makes you question, how many negative experiences are folks having with a brand that you don't hear a comment on, right? I'm not going to go comment about the packaging or put something out on the website around why I returned the jacket for consumers, but some folks will. So the question really around when you think of e-commerce is, and I'm going to use the word that we've seen through COVID, quiet quitting. How many people are quiet quitting a brand? How many people are saying, you know what, this is just not working for me anymore. I'm going to go try this other thing over there. And that's something we really can't put numbers on. But this is going to go back, and Patagonia is going to take it in. And because of the comments I put on my real return, they're going to take it in as a damaged product return. So it's going to go into their damage bucket. And they're going to lose the fact that it really wasn't product damage. It was packaging damage. And there could have been a really different outcome there.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And when I think about some of the things that we've already hit on, right? So we've talked about the marketing side of packaging. We've talked about sustainability concerns. What can you recycle? What can you not? We've talked about different innovative uses of ways to get product there. We've talked about total cost with breaking the Corona bottles on the rail car, and then even the interaction with shipping. So to your point, perhaps Patagonia would have been okay if it had come UPS or FedEx and they, put it on your front step instead of trying to jam it into the mailbox. Packaging is so interconnected. So when we think about how companies and procurement teams are managing that spend, is there a common way of addressing this spend category, or is it highly dependent on the package, the distance, the mode of transportation, and even the identity of the consumer that they're targeting?
Every situation is going to have a little bit uniqueness to it, right? So how your company organization is set up, how you're structured. The one thing I tend to tell a lot of procurement professionals that I talk to is, in procurement and how we were all trained and grew up, is we've been focused on the cost side of the business. Yes. We've been trained to spend a lot of time there, figure out how to take cost out, take cost out. Our measurement tools are, how much cost did you take out this year? What's your purchase price variance? How much are you going to save me this year over last year? We have the opportunity and frankly the right to go say, hey, time out. Let me go help you with the revenue side of the business. Let me get involved and figure out how to help you sell more of your product. Or let's change the metrics. Give me credit for what the total value I drive out of the supply chain is. Maybe the right decision is to spend more on packaging because it's going to take less labor to pack and it's going to be easier to get to the customer, and my total cost goes down. But a lot of folks aren't measuring that. In fact, I've talked to procurement people in the last 2 weeks that said, that's great, you can take costs on my small parcel shipping. That doesn't impact me. I just need cheaper boxes. That's great, and we want to help that person specifically. But really, when we think about it, we got to look at that whole thing holistically. And I do see some comments thrown in, but when we think about the way of approaching it, I like to take a clean sheet approach, and that's how I like to talk to folks when they come to talk to us at Procure Analytics. But in general, from a procurement perspective, I've always thought of it that way. So breaking down your spend buckets, there's certain categories where you're going to be very large in. So if I think about companies I used to work for, we were a very large buyer of a folding carton board. That's something that we had a unique expertise in buying because we were manufacturing folding cartons. That's part of the packaging we probably wouldn't have outsourced or put into a group of other categories, right? A lot of our category managers or procurement folks, they wear many hats. We had somebody that was primarily looking at that fiber board. When you took a step down and you started looking at corrugate, we started getting a question there, right? We weren't a huge buyer of corrugated material. Maybe look at it. As soon as you went below that, highly unmatched, highly decentralized. Data, specifications were hard to get a hold of. So when we start looking at a company, we kind of want to take those steps and look at it. Maybe you have somebody who's really managing your top two categories. Corrugated, because you ship a lot of potatoes. Your P&G, so you're going to buy a lot of corrugated. Your Amazon, you're buying a lot of corrugated. When you start going into those other categories, what we tend to find is folks have left those up to local decision buyers. They haven't really been managed. So it's almost looking at it in waves or approaches and how you slice that out in a different direction. So clean sheeting from that perspective. Then what we like to talk to folks about from a procurement perspective is you've got historical data, you've got some market data. Let's look at a cost build from the bottoms up of what should you be paying that in the market. Take the fact out that I've got a database I can go ahead, but that's what a procurement person should be looking at. You've been buying, you've got peers. Everybody in procurement has somebody that works somewhere else. You've got reference points on what something should cost. So you start forming that mentality. And then you're looking at what we all would go say is, hey, we're going to go run our RFP. Yay, we're going to run an RFP. We're going to do 3 bids and a buy, and we're going to go put a number up on the board and commit to the company that we're going to deliver these savings. Really, over the last decade, I've come to believe that RFPs just don't work. Certain categories, yeah, you're going to drive some cost out, but there's a lot of reasons why now in today's world it doesn't work. One is data's at our fingertips. You've got any packaging item, if you want a reference point, Uline's got millions of items out there that's going to give you a reference point of what your top end you should be paying for anything. You know what you're buying today. You know how to figure things out in between. Incumbents. Every supplier knows they do throw in an RFP out in the marketplace. You're going to go back to your incumbent because we're all fearful of change. We're all change fatigue because of COVID and everything we've went through. So the easy button is if I can get within a couple points with my incumbent, take the savings, don't make any changes. I've checked the box for my boss that the next 3 years I don't have to look at the category. There's really much more value today in driving into a strategic relationship and understanding how to manage that cost across the full spectrum than just piece price. So really that's where I would start. And then as we go through that process, I wouldn't take everything out at one point in time. There's specialty packaging that should be treated differently. If you're a large buyer of corrugated, maybe that's a category that gets carved out. And you look at those categories you haven't looked at differently. A lot of folks don't know why they're buying what they're buying. Somebody 10 years ago said, we're buying this, and it hasn't changed. So reviewing that on a more regular basis than simply wanting to buy what you're buying today at a lower cost is a much better, more sustainable way to improve value for your organization.
Absolutely. Now, let me pause here, Matt, because as you'd said, a couple of interesting questions have come in. One of them is you talked about specialized buys, and that might be, in fact, you're buying a ton of corrugated. But in this example, we have a question from Bharat, who works in healthcare, talking about cold logistics. So another thing we all learned from COVID, those vaccines had to ship ultra cold at first, but then just regular old cold, I think once some of the packaging started to catch up. Are there any trends or special considerations or things that you're seeing in the packaging space that feeds into this growing need for cold logistics?
Absolutely. Cold chain supply has continued to increase, especially with folks wanting to do more meals at home and things along those lines. And there's a lot of different options when it comes out there. As you mentioned, Kelly, certain different temperatures, the COVID vaccines need to be really, really cold at one point. There are sustainable solutions. There are our traditional EPS coolers that you'd find like when you go inside of a gas station if you're going to go out on a boat. Not highly sustainable, but really good with keeping something cold for a period of time. There's a new company out there, Cruise Foam, that is actually making EPS-like coolers out of shrimp shells. So fully biodegradable back into it. So the early tests coming out of there, that is you're on par with the cooling properties and the temperature regulations of an EPS foam, your traditional cooler models. But when you think about EPS coolers, and I'm still finding folks today that are doing this, they're shipping EPS coolers without a box over them through UPS and FedEx Small Parcel. If you're doing that or you know someone that's doing that, the cost of the box is a lot cheaper than the surcharges you're getting for shipping a cooler through the system. It's a lot like when I have a friend who tries to check their bike and claim it as golf clubs on Delta. It's especially at they're paying for it. That corrugated box is going to save you a lot in your small parcel pieces. When you're thinking about cold chain as a whole, you really want to understand your ship to zip codes, right? So we support some cold chain folks, and we had a lot of high temperatures last year. You may not have a high temperature where you're shipping from. You've really got to understand your models and how much ice or dried ice you're putting into those boxes based on where you're shipping to, your journey, what you're going to be looking at. And there should be some seasonality and programming into your WMS that helps decide what that looks like. But I still find a lot today that folks are throwing in what they just thought of previously. Hey, we always put 5 pounds of ice in the winter. We put 10 pounds of ice in the summer. Doesn't matter if it's going interstate and we're in Washington and it's just going to stay here and be cool, or if we're shipping to Florida. So there's a lot of different pieces brought, but it really becomes interesting when you start looking at form, fit, function. Are you going to kit these items yourself? Do you want them coming to you pre-kitted? Are you going to have massive coolers on site where you're going to keep ice, or you want ice delivered frozen to you as just in time? How do you pack these out? How do you interact with them? But a lot of this comes down to what you ultimately need to do, the period of time, and more folks investing, in my mind, in solutions for EPS coolers or some sort of closed loop chain there, because a lot of those really are one way, and there's no easy way to recycle EPS today.
Yeah. And to that point about recycling and sustainability, we also have a question from Bill about the most cost-effective ways to ship sustainably if you're trying to remove those styrofoam peanuts and some of the plastic airbags that are in there for protection. Bill, I will add to that, the static electricity of styrofoam peanuts makes me crazy. If you spill one on the floor, then it's like stuck to your hand, and then it's stuck to your shoe and you're trying to clean them up. Even the consumer annoyance of that, beyond knowing that they're not the best thing for the environment. Where are you seeing around sustainable and cost-effective, but still protecting the quality of the item in the package?
Sure. There's a lot that folks have done with branding of this now as well, with fiber-based packaging. So we were all familiar with like the fiber packaging that's in Easter baskets for kids, or that straw. We've got packaging like that. You've also got companies out there like Seaman Paper, who's come up with little small corrugated pieces that can be printed and branded or to your color, so your product can sit on top of that inside of your unboxing experience. But if we're talking more around protective packaging or dunnage inside of, let's say, an Amazon package, there's companies out there such as Pregis that have moved to a much higher recycled content air pillow that, while not curbside recyclable, can be recycled with your grocery bags at your grocery store. So if you're already going to the grocery store once a week, you put those in with the grocery bags, they are commercially recyclable. Pulling in that higher recycled content, that's a step in the right direction. And depending on what you're shipping, we've seen folks that have moved to more of a crumpled paper perspective, right? So you got a couple different companies out there that are providing different types of paper, pre-crumpling and different designs. One of the things I tend to talk to procurement folks around this is not necessarily getting away from plastics, because I don't think all plastics are bad, and a lot of these film pillows are a single material plastic, which is easy to recycle. It's looking at your air pillow sizes. You may have decided you're shipping a 4x8 pillow years ago, and your product mix has changed. You may be using a lot less pillows to be able to shrink that box down if you look at your pillow size and how you're changing that. But really, from a protective perspective, paper is way more sustainable. There are more trees in managed forest in North America today than there were 100 years ago. It's an entire industry. It's taking carbon dioxide out of the air. That paper is very easy. Consumers recognize it. Hey, I can recycle this. I can put this in my recycling can. And Bill, I think you're at WestRock. It's kind of cut off on my screen, but I think you are. WestRock here in Atlanta has done a great job of advertising around pizza boxes, and the fact that for the longest of time we've been told don't recycle a pizza box. It's brand new corrugated. It's great fiber with improvements in the recovery fiber stream. Pizza boxes are now recyclable, guys. Please put your pizza boxes in the recycled bins. It's a lot of great fiber going back in to make another product. It really should have much more than the one life it's got for the 1 hour that it's been from the pizza place to your home before it ends up in the trash. So a lot of solutions there. But Bill, peanuts, in the last place I've actually seen those styrofoam peanuts that Kelly mentioned was actually at a UPS store where you go and have somebody pack it. And really, those I think are going by the wayside. But I don't know in every case how you would get rid of a plastic pillow or plastic air bubble protection. Plastics are great in certain applications, and they're going to be here for a long time. We really just need to get a better recycle stream or reuse stream for these things. But there are paper alternatives in some cases, and those are great ones, right? We've seen a big move in padded mailers from being fully resin-based to having fiber-based mailers that are curbside recyclable. We got to go another step further and figure out, can we fully replace all of our plastic uses with paper? Absolutely not. Paper's not going to perform there. But another good one that we saw at Pack Expo this year, and Bill, your company is actually a part of this with Atlantic, the canopy wrap over bottles or cans. So you're replacing a shrink film, bundling film for water bottles or beer with paper. I think that's a great innovation and a move into a direction that is more sustainable. So there's continuing to be folks that are out there investing in it. It's an industry that we continue to need to look at and grow more. So hopefully, Bill, that answers your question. But if not, throw something else in the chat. We can keep going.
And actually, one more question on the sustainability front, and this is from Vivian. So she's asked about sustainability objectives hitting through packaging, but in the entire value chain, which makes me think I've been predominantly focused in our conversation on today. What packaging am I buying to move product to my customer? Are you also hearing conversations, because every company selling something is also a company buying something, having requirements around how product is being shipped to them from suppliers? Is there any concern around that from an overall ESG or sustainability perspective?
Kelly, that's actually one of the big topics that a lot of the private equity partners have started talking with us about this year and coming into the year in late December was really around, hey, we want to look at ESG as a whole. The big problem we have when we start to try to talk to somebody and when I have a conversation with anybody around sustainability is we all have a different definition of what sustainability is. And we all have these different measurements that somebody at corporate has come up with or some status. I think EcoVadis has done a great job of certifying certain companies to be sustainable as they go through there, and trying to find folks that have partnered with EcoVadis to be certified in their methods is a great way of doing it. Some of our preferred partners are EcoVadis certified, and some of them are up to the silver level. But when we think about it, what we're really talking about is a full life cycle analysis, right? So one of the things we do when somebody says, hey, I want to get out of plastic. Plastic is bad. It's like, okay, great. That's your point of view. Let's look at what the alternatives we're going to move into it. And we're going to run an LCA analysis and say, okay, from cradle to grave, what is this plastic packaging doing versus whatever the alternative is? What are we really improving through that full life cycle, right? So shipment from the manufacturing to shipping to the point where you got it, through distribution to the consumer till we take it back in. That's actually really eye-opening to folks. Interesting, a lot of the statistics that come out of LCA are kind of hard for somebody to quantum. So it'll say, hey, you saved X million pounds of CO2. Well, I can't really figure out what a pound of CO2 looks like. It's an air. I can't put it in a pound. But if I tell you you're saving, 40 hectares of trees, you understand that. Or 20 swimming pools full of water is how many boxes you reduced from the UPS system this year. People gravitate towards those pieces. So really when we start looking at it, and this is where we've gotten deeper into the logistics side of it this year as an organization, is how do I understand what I'm receiving? Can I reuse any of that going through? Then what am I adding to that? And then where are my distribution points moving through there? So if we go back to my USPS piece, well, it got to USPS somehow. And most likely it moved on a 53-foot trailer. Then it got to the UPS store and was sorted, and it was on my little mail truck that came to me. Before that, I have to speculate, but it's not made in the USA. Patagonia's not making that jacket here, so most likely we're in the ocean. Yep. So as we think through all those different pieces and moving it through that full supply chain, we've also seen a lot of folks move towards our nearshoring. So Mexico has become popular again. Some South America countries have become popular again, Central America, to manufacture some of these items and move things closer to help with those sustainability goals, their ESG scores and your reporting. It's not as simple as saying we're here, we want to go there. It's not like the federal fuel mandates and GM coming out saying we're going back to plug-in hybrid vehicles to help us get to the number because we're behind. It's a lot more difficult. A lot more parties are involved inside those organizations to get to the point of where we want to be. But it is addressable. It is something you can take steps to go look at. And I would definitely recommend not just jumping in and switching packaging to switch it for packaging's sake, is really understand why you're making the change. Are you making an actual impact? Or are you simply checking a box because somebody said we want to be 100% plastic free by 2030? You may be adding cost and additional ESG negativity to the environment or negative sustainable factors by your decisions, depending on what you're buying.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because we talked about all of these different things that are included in the overall packaging category, all of the different things they can be made of. We've talked about plastics, we've talked about fiber, we've talked about corrugated, we talked about shrimp, apparently. When we think about taking that total spend and all of the variety that's included in it, how do you typically start to break that down into how are we going to segment this off to align with different supplier capabilities or around the use of the packaging? How are you looking at that total spend and figuring out maybe how the contracts are going to start to break down into subcategories of that spend?
That's a great question. And that's something we generally walk folks through very early on in our process, Kelly. But if I think about it from a procurement perspective and what I've practiced over the years is I'm looking for my internal customer, which most likely is my DC or my manufacturing facility. How are they using the items today? Great, I got my spend cube. I understand who they bought from, but how are they using it? How are they receiving it? Do they have storage capabilities? Do they not have storage capabilities? Do they go hand to mouth on certain things? Are there opportunities to change how they're using items, right? When I was in a mill manufacturing procurement role, we changed how we packed out something, and we increased the use of film, decreased the use of strapping, but we also removed a lot of safety concerns because of the amount of strapping and cuts that we're getting from it. So there are different cost methods to change there. So understanding what's going on there. Then when we bring it back, we're back to our spend. It's okay, we're going to bucketize. Where do we as an organization have a specific expertise that we should be able to go achieve better than market results? All right, those buckets we've probably got a category person focused on. And then they've probably got a tail of other packaging categories that they're responsible for. There may be a contract. It may just be local decision making. We start looking at that. Then you're going to look geographically. Okay, so if I'm a big user of corrugated material, there's 4 or 5 large national guys that can cover probably all my sites. But if I'm a smaller regional guy, maybe I want to look at small regionals. Maybe I want to look at nationals. Understanding the assets that those converters have, what's going to give me the best cost. We really don't want to ship corrugated very far. On the flip side, if you're shipping labels, it's pretty cost effective for me to drop ship a box of labels from anywhere in the country. Freight's not really going to be that big of a concern for me versus large corrugated boxes. So regionality. Then we're going to look for what we're trying to get out of the suppliers, right? So it cannot be about a price cost equation. If that's all you're looking for, you're going to be right back to square one in the next 12 months, and you're not going to derive the actual paper savings you believe you got from your event. So it's finding what you need to do to grow. Maybe you need some help with equipment and automation. It's finding somebody who's got a specialty in that that's willing to invest, get those resources on site. Not just tell you they're going to send somebody in there, but literally they're going to bring those people in. They're going to show you. They're going to tell you with their presence what they've been telling you and what they're going to put on paper. My belief for contracts are really there for when something goes wrong. We don't pull the contract every morning before we go talk to the supplier. Oh, what's this section 2, subsection B say? Now we're going to go have this conversation. Yeah. They're there for the catastrophe. They're there for a force majeure situation. They're there when you get into an argument because you can't resolve something that's caused some sort of loss for somebody. You go back to the contract, it clearly states those things. Yes, you're going to document pricing for where it starts. We all know that in this market, that pricing is only going to be good for a period of time because the indexes are going to move. I know we've got some folks on the phone from a couple of different publications out there that track those indexes. So those indexes move, all of our prices change again. Versus what we used to do is negotiate that every time it has. We've got clear language that's set out there so we can go run our business and not worry about it. We want to be in a cost position so that we know we're advantaged, but we know where we're going to go and we can budget and plan for it. It's those unplanned, unexpected cost changes that a lot of us experienced during COVID that really throws things for a loop. The other piece is once you've got those strategic suppliers identified, it's really then going in and understanding what categories do they have the expertise in, and then what categories do you need a dual solution for versus can you go single source? And when you get out of direct manufacturing and in distribution, this is something we talk through procurement folks a lot on. Even if you're using one distributor across all your network, you're not single sourced because those distributors, they don't make anything. They're buying from so many different people. So you are still protected with multiple different sources of supply. So talking through those pieces before you really get out to the market are highly important in my opinion.
And there's a relationship component to it, right? In fact, we have a comment, Phil Beitson's with us, saying the best contract is one that you don't actually have to look at after the day it's signed because the relationship between you and the supplier is able to transcend that. Now, we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about your Patagonia jacket, that understanding the consumer is critical to understand how that packaging is going to impact future purchase decisions. How does procurement get that feedback loop? And I'm sure this is something that's slightly different but applies Whether your company is business to consumer or business to business, how do you in fact understand the effectiveness and the appropriateness of the packaging that's currently in use?
A personal example, back at a mill company where we had some packaging fail, it was I had a VP of operations coming into my office very, very hot about having to pay claims, blaming it on the packaging. I'm going to guess that still happens in some organizations where it's a cause and effect. There's a big cause out there somewhere, and it affected some sort of business, and so now it's coming back down. But I know in talking to several different folks across the industry, we'll pick on Home Depot locally here in Atlanta, that a lot of their design team actually takes damage and return data to inform how they build their packaging out. One of the former designers at Home Depot that worked with me in another life used a lot of data there to figure out that when they had this new wrench set out that had one missing because it was out there for you to touch and feel, people kept returning it because they thought a wrench was missing out of the set that was hanging in the back, but it was out there for you to touch and feel. Yeah. They moved it around, right? So they're using that data to inform how they're marketing to consumers. I personally feel that data is typically going back to your operations team and really is getting isolated, and they're looking at ways they can change labor and things along those lines. If that feedback comes back through procurement, you're most likely going to get a conversation with the supplier. The supplier is probably seeing that same problem someplace else and can tell you how to solve it. You got to remember that these suppliers are servicing thousands of different customers across the country. They've seen your issue or some other issue like that before. Maybe not your sales rep, but the company has, and they're going to have ideas and thought process to get you there faster. But really, it's around sharing that data. We like to encourage folks to put that in some sort of shared location. And I like to tell procurement leaders and managers, you really should go walk the floor of all the operations you support and have a working relationship, not with the VP of ops, not saying that's not important, but those actual managers that are on the floor day in, day out. They can become your best friends to make you look like a hero within procurement, because they're going to tell you how things actually work within the organization and how those items that you're buying for them do or do not perform.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about a lot of things today beyond cost, but being procurement, we should also talk about cost a little bit. When you're looking at running a packaging related sourcing project, what are some of the cost levels that should be evaluated?
So what we want to start with is base materials, right? So if we're thinking about corrugated, we're talking about the liners, we're looking at resin, we're looking at cost per pound. We'll build all those costs up to understand where somebody's buying today. And I highly recommend folks doing that. There are indexes out there, and I see a couple comments on the right-hand side here. Yeah. Ryan, thank you for that comment. I'm not going to answer that today. Happy to call you afterwards and talk through that with you about buyers and contracts. But as we think through that process, most of these indexes are paid for a prescription. I see Andrew's mentioned this out here, right? So if you want access to what was the Chem Data Index, or which is now ICIS, to understand how resin prices are moving in real time, you're paying for that subscription. Can you get that information? Yeah, you can probably get it. It's going to be a little bit dated. Frankly, the suppliers all have it, and they're paying for those today. So not necessary for every buyer in the world to have those subscriptions. Same with a RISI or things along those lines. But if you're a big buyer of resin, if you're a big buyer of corrugated packaging, or you've got a full packaging team, those services are really important. Now, I'm picking on Ryan a little bit, but I actually really like what he's doing over at Bloomberg with his new index on corrugated boxes, which is different from what RISI has been offering and kind of was the only game in town. So Ryan's got an interesting perspective in using the Bloomberg platform there. There's definitely some ways of looking at this differently. But to get that data pulled together, it takes a lot of cost. So I don't know you could ever get away from a pay-for-use index, but I do think there should be some choices. And one of those things we're starting to see happen right now, and a lot of this is being driven by the randomness in changes and the market adjustments that CDI has done to resin. CDI has this fear of a $1 price for linear low-density polyethylene, and when it gets close, they randomly adjust the market and drop it down. Trying to explain that to a buyer who's not following that all the time, they're like, no, it just dropped 45 cents. I need my discount. We have IHS that's now come out. A lot of distributors say, hey, we want to peg the IHS because they're not adjusting it like that, and it's more representation of the market. So you're starting to see that happen now on a resin side. I think Ryan's got a shot there with having a dual index on the paper side as well, and really being able to get these guys to be much more friendly from a cost perspective for folks to be able to have access to that. It shouldn't just be the large organizations that have access to this data to be informed. But if you're looking to talk about those things, we've got a great market point of view that Jimmy Strom produces for all of our members on a regular basis. with insights from across a lot of different forums, as well as our conversations. But that market data is critically important to help you inform, because it's going to lead you to where you should be looking at different things.
Now, do you ever find that some of the smaller spend or more niche categories of packaging end up in the tail when we think about that long tail of spend? If you're sort of looking to maybe corrugated as a larger category, but there might be something more niche that ends up getting buried down deep. Does that ever happen with some of the more specialized things people might be buying?
Not even the specialized, just some at large organizations. So we're working with a very large food manufacturer today that what they would consider their tail of packaging for, let's say, airbags that Corona Beer chose not to use, is still millions of dollars. But it's in their tail because they've got a category manager assigned to a category. It's a couple $100 million for all their packaging spend. That's not important to them. Those categories are really where third-party partners help that may be able to amalgamate those things together. But yeah, packaging ends up in a tail quite frequently, especially when you start getting into some of the specialty categories that are maybe only used by one site. When you're thinking of that from a procurement perspective and our AP roster, it's not going to pop into that top, right? And so when I pull an AP spend, hey, I'm looking at that top 80%. Where's my 80% of spend? I'm going to go look there. I know I can drive the biggest value. I may be missing all the things down here. The other big issue we still run into, and I think Matt's done a great job over at SpecRite of helping large organizations with this, is folks have a lot of legacy supplier names. They don't amalgamate them together. So you may have somebody that you think's in your tail that's actually now part of this. Past company I used to work for was Veritiv. A lot of folks still have Expedex and Unisource in the system. So when you run an AP register, it can come out as 3 different folks and look like it's not a big supplier to you. As an easy example from there. But SpecRite's done a really good job of helping folks get that data, keep the data from both the drawing and artwork perspective pulled together, and being able to understand how to go do something. The first step in any procurement is understanding what you're actually buying. And in all my years of doing it, the only way I've known how to actually get to the real data is getting out and talking to the folks in the field, because they know what they're buying day in, day out. The second best way, I guess, would be to comb through a series of thousands of invoices and pull that data together, but you're still going to have to talk to people. We are in a profession that, while folks say we're not in sales and we may be called sales prevention, we are actually selling constantly internally to our members and our partners to be able to get done what we've been tasked by the organization to do. So it's an interesting role for procurement, because you're in that buyer seat, but you're also in the sales seat, and you're wearing both hats as you go through the whole time.
As sort of a follow-on question to that, any advice or best practices that you have around packaging specific stakeholder management, project management, either things you've seen work or things that you've seen go poorly?
We'll take it, we could say packaging, but we'll take it a little bit more broadly for procurement as a whole. The biggest challenge to any implementation, packaging or chemical or other commodity you're buying out there, is the local buyer. We always run into the local buyer has a 20-year relationship with Joe or Jim or Susie, and that local buyer doesn't like corporate, because we're here to help, and we're just going to make your life more difficult. They'll smile and nod while you're there, and then they're going to be like, you came in an hour ago, you're leaving in an hour.
Yeah.
I'm going to be here for the next 10
I'm going
years.
back to exactly what I was doing before. Yeah.
Right. So in procurement, we have this tendency to tell people what to do or how to do something. A lot more collaboration needs to happen with procurement on the front of these projects around how we're going to tie the goal of procurement, which is saving cost for the company, into what the goals of those other individuals are. Gaining buy-in early on in these projects we're going to go execute are critically important. But if you want to get the compliance to the project you're running above that 50% mark, you're going to come down to your local buyers, getting them involved early, making them feel part of the process. Because we all know that we never really wanted to do what our parents told us to do. We didn't want to go to bed when our parents told us to go to bed. We didn't want to put our shoes away. But if it was turned into something where we wanted to do this because it was beneficial, magically we were running to go do it. And so these buyers, in many cases, they know their business inside and out. They are the truth when you need to get to the data. You need to understand how they work, how they want to work, and pull them into your process to ensure success and longevity for your change management.
Well, perhaps one of the incentives for procurement around finding a way to get those relationships right is the opportunity to do one of the things that we always want to do, which is not just guard the bottom line, but actually help add to and grow the top line. And it seems to me, given the role that packaging plays in, regardless of who your consumer is, that buyer experience, it seems like packaging is a huge opportunity for us to have a positive impact on the top line.
I think packaging is screaming for more attention within inside procurement organizations. In some cases, because of all your direct materials, it becomes second fiddle. And I know everybody's wearing more hats out there, but packaging really is that manifestation that is going to help consumers continue to buy from you. And we think about B2B as well. When you walk through somebody else's warehouse and you see your products all damaged sitting on yourself, but somebody else is clean, you have an emotional connection to it. Packaging is emotional. People get emotional about it. I was surprised early in my career how emotional people got about the shade of brown on the corrugated box and how they thought it could be different. But we're all emotional beings. We all have emotional reactions to things. It's understanding those emotional triggers and driving packaging to be a value generator or a revenue increaser and getting involved early enough to be able to help support that. Too many times we're shipping a corrugated shipper from a DC to somebody and it's blank on the outside. It's got a certification stamp on the bottom. You're missing a huge opportunity from a marketing perspective. They're already buying a print plate because they're hitting it with a cert stamp. Yeah. Print plates are cheap. Keep it to a single color. Maybe print on the inside if you're afraid that your product is so high value. Print a nice little message in there. Give them a QR code. Consumers love interacting with packaging. In fact, you still see TikTok videos of people how they interact with packaging or unopen it. The butterfly one is continuing to fill my Instagram feed with people big boxes of butterflies out. So people love packaging. People talk about packaging. Packaging does lead to the brand. And really with over a third of packaging now going into e-commerce, packaging is with every consumer on a daily basis. We interact with it and we fortunately, unfortunately share our feelings with our friends around brands we like or don't like. One of the brands that a lot of folks thought was going highly sustainable was Seventh Generation with their fiber-based, quote unquote, fiber-based bottle for laundry detergent, only to find out underneath you have a full resin bottle holding all the liquid together. It wasn't really fiber. So now we had a confusing story, but it was kind of cool when folks were talking about, hey, they went sustainable. Harder to recycle. You're going to have to break that apart now in two different streams. So a lot of different things to look at there. Great marketing, good try at sustainability, needs a little bit more work to really hit the nail.
Well, and I think to your point, truly understanding that consumer and that product and what motivates them to buy. There are also commercials where companies advertise that something comes in plain or unmarked packaging. I know we just recently, the other day, it was a TV commercial for sort of like long-lasting meal kits. And they specifically called out the fact that it was going to come in an unmarked box. And one of my kids asking, well, why are they advertising that it comes in an unmarked box? Well, maybe you don't want your neighbors to know you're preparing for the zombie apocalypse, right? There's information that's revealed. No one questions the happy Amazon smile box sitting on your front step. But if you got sort of like doomsday prepper box sitting on your front step, that's a piece of information that that company is exposing. And understanding that that consumer is already private and probably doesn't want to advertise, right? That the zombies are on the horizon. Yet another way of looking at maybe less is more with packaging, but truly understanding the relationship that it allows the company to forge with that consumer.
Absolutely.
Now, Matt, as we start to wrap, and this has been an absolutely fascinating hour, I want to give you sort of a carte blanche opportunity just to offer some advice. So we've asked you a lot of specific questions about what constitutes packaging, how to manage costs and stakeholders and relationships, and sustainability considerations and logistics. But if you were to have people walk away from today's session, whether they're listening to us live or they're hearing it later on demand, what would be sort of your initial advice, the thing that should be at the top of their list when it comes to packaging?
The number one thing I'd tell somebody to do when they're thinking about packaging is ensure that you've got your data. Don't start talking to folks without that data. Data is key. And the same messaging I would give to folks on my team is talk to folks in the way that you want to be talked to. Don't direct folks. it's an emotional connection, show some empathy from one another, or the roles and things people are going through as you're trying to collect those pieces. And it's all about collaboration, right? So it's a team sport. I know we have a lot of individual things that we all get measured on these days, but packaging, procurement, all a team sport. It's not an individual success. We win and lose as a team, but really get your data pulled together, understand your data, spend more time understanding your business, then act. Stop, think, act. It'll make it a much better procurement process.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you for that advice, which certainly applies to packaging, but also applies to many of the other things that procurement is managing. I appreciate you being with us today to give us such an in-depth and colorful, I have to say, look into the world of packaging for 2024.
Thank you very much for having me, Kelly.
And thank you as well to everybody that joined us live, everybody that's listening in on demand. Thank you for putting your questions and your comments in the box. Thank you for those little applauses that I see floating up past our videos. We're so glad that everybody was able to be here and be a part of this conversation. And we welcome you to follow us and join us for other events in the future. But for now, have a great rest of your day.